In this screencast, we're going to talk about how to use formulas in Excel. So to start with, let's talk about the difference between text and formulas. If I just click in a cell and I type a word like the word average, then that's just a word. It's just text. It doesn't cause Excel to do anything. A formula is different. I'm going to click in that cell. I'm going to hit the delete key. Formulas in Excel always begin by being typed with the equal sign. So if I click in that cell and I type equals, and now I type the word average, you notice that Excel is suggesting a number of functions to me. If I click this first one, average, it gives me a little hint about what I should do next. So Excel seems to be suggesting that I can type a number or a couple of numbers in there, and it will give me the average of those numbers. We could try that right now. We could say, well, what's the average of 1 and 3? Of course, the answer should be 2. Sure enough. But that's not a very useful way to use Excel. It's not very helpful to put those numbers in by yourself. So instead of putting those numbers in ourselves, we can select data in Excel to be used to compute the average. For instance, if I click and drag across a selection of data like this, and then hit enter, it should take the average of this data, which also happens to be 2. If we double click this 2, we can see the formula that's behind it. You notice that it says the average of A2 to C2. We should talk a little bit about how Excel describes the data that it's working with. So each column is given a letter. This is column A, column B, column C, and so on. And each row is given a number, row 1, row 2, and so on. So A2 refers to the cell at column A, row 2, and saying A2 colon C2 means all of the data from A2 through C2. Now Excel's pretty clever. If we select this data here, this cell, number 2, hit Command C to copy, click in the next cell, and click Command V to paste, you'll notice that it did not copy the number 2. Instead, for some reason, we seem to have a 3. Let's double click on that 3 to see the formula behind it. Well, now it appears that Excel's taking the average of A3 to C3, whereas before it was taking the average of A2 to C2. When we copied that formula down one row, Excel's guessing that we probably want to now compute the average of the next row, not the row we came from. And so it automatically changed the formula, trying to give us what we wanted. If that's not behavior that we want, we can modify that behavior. Let's delete this 3, come back up here to the 2, and double click to take a look at the formula. If you put a $ in front of the column, in front of the row indicator, the 2, let's put a $ in front of both of those 2's. The $ means don't change the 2 when you copy the formula. So I'm going to hit enter. Of course, that didn't change that calculation at all. You can hit Command C to copy and Command V to paste, and now you see that it pasted in a 2. And let's take a look at the formula behind it. And sure enough, you can see that it is in fact referring to the previous data. Sometimes that's behavior that you want. Let's go back up here to this one. Let's now copy it to the right. So it now gives us a 2.5. The 2.5, let's double click that and see where that's coming from. That's now coming from taking the average of these numbers, the 2 and the 3. Of course, the average of those is 2.5. It did that because when we copied over one column, Excel automatically shifted our data inputs over one column. So instead of being the first 3, it's now column B, C, and D. Again, if that's not behavior that we want, we can change the formula that we're copying. We put a $ in front of the letters that indicate the columns. Now, when we copy over, the data doesn't change. Let's go back to our preference list data now and talk about some functions that might be useful when you're working with your preference lists. One of the most useful functions is going to be counting the number of times that something occurs. And Excel has a function for that. It's called the COUNTIF function. So I'll type equal to enter a formula, and then COUNTIF, and it even suggests that for me. And then in the little tip here, it suggests what should come next. There should be a range and then a criteria. Suppose I want to know how many times the letter A occurs in these first few entries. I can select the range, A2 to A15. I could have also typed that by hand. Type a comma, and then under criteria, I'm going to put in quotation marks the letter A. It tells me 6. So what Excel is saying is that there are 6 occurrences of the letter A in this blue box. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sure enough. Now, this formula gives us a number, and we can do arithmetic with the formula just like we would normally do arithmetic. So, for instance, if I wanted to multiply this by the number 3, I could type 3 star to multiply that by the number 3. If I hit enter, now I get 18 because the letter A occurred 6 times, and I'm multiplying it by 3. If we want to count the number of A's in the first column, we can do that as well. One way would be to click and drag all the way to the bottom, but there's 28,000 entries, so that's going to be a little bit tedious. One way to select the entire first column is just to type A:A, and Excel will automatically select the entire first column. So Excel calculates almost instantly that there's 9,874 occurrences of A in the first column. Another function that's going to be really handy, especially when you're computing Condorcet's method, are the logical functions AND and OR. Now, these functions take a little bit of getting used to, but they're very, very helpful. The AND function, which we'll talk about a little bit in class, you can type it and then click on it to get a tip, is expecting a couple of logical expressions. So we can type something like this cell equals D, comma, this cell equals E, enter. And this formula evaluates to true because the first expression is D and the second expression is E. If we take that and copy it down into the next cell, it will now test if this is a D and this is an E. We expect the result to be false. Sure enough, if we double click that, we can see what it's doing. It's checking whether this is a D and this is an E. Since it's not the case that this is a D and this is an E, it returns false. Let's try another example here. If we could type equals and that this is an A, and we could check whether the second one is not an A. The not operator is like this, a less than and then a greater than symbol. We expect this to return false because it's not the case that the first is an A and the second is not an A. And again, that returned false for us. The OR operator is somewhat similar. The OR operator returns true if either the first condition or the second condition is true. So we can test whether this is a D or this is an F. This should return true because the first condition is true. We could copy that down and see that the next one's also true, but the next one should be false. Let's check to see why the next one's false. This is false because the first one is not a D and the second one is not an F, so neither condition is satisfied. We can build up more complicated expressions by nesting these. For instance, we can say it needs to return if the following two conditions are both true. The first one is a D, and the second one is either a D or an E. So we can write that by saying the second is either a D or the second is an E. This should return true. We copy that down one, we should get false in the next row. We can see why. This returns false because in order for the AND to be true, both of the conditions have to be satisfied. The first condition is that the blue cell has to be a D, which it's not, and so the AND will automatically return a false there. So we've covered how to type formulas into Excel, how to copy formulas and keep them from changing, how to use the COUNTIF function, and how to use the AND and OR functions.